And so this area, tell me about where we are.
This is the personal side of Lincoln. I think when it comes to Abraham Lincoln, many people know a little bit about his personal life, but it's not really talked about much. It's not reflected upon much in the life of Lincoln in museums. So this area is really dedicated to the personal side of Lincoln. Behind me here, we talk about Matilda Edwards and Mary Owens, two of Lincoln's failed relationships. So we talk about his romantic relations, or actually the lack thereof, because he was not the most proper gentleman when it comes to ladies. He didn't know how to be a gentleman. So these are some failed relationships, and so it talks about how Lincoln made some blunders when it comes to that. And then he met Mary at a ball in Springfield, so we hear about the association of Mary with Abraham Lincoln. And then we get into Lincoln's children, and so once Mary Lincoln and Abraham Lincoln married, we hear about the Lincoln boys, from Robert to Eddie to Willie and Tad. So some personal stories about them. And we also hear about Lincoln's friendship. We hear about Joshua Speed, who was a friend of Lincoln's. We hear about Lily Barber, who was a black man who was Lincoln's barber, but they had a really close relationship. And these are stories that not often are heard about Abraham Lincoln, especially Billy the Barber, who, again, was a poor black man who really became a friend of Lincoln. And because of that association, I think Lincoln really began to understand a little bit more what life was like for African Americans in his life. And so I think that's a great story to be heard in this museum.
Wonderful. Okay. And then moving forward.
You bet.
So now we're getting into more of the political end.
We are. Lincoln reawakens in the 1850s. He had served a term in Congress. He had pretty much resigned himself that his career was going to be in politics because his term in Congress was not very successful. Then comes the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Then comes slavery as far as a national phenomenon. Lincoln is reawakened. And so he becomes sort of a moral voice for the Republican Party and for the nation. And so this is what we get into here in this area. We get into how slavery becomes a huge issue in the nation, and how, in many ways, Illinois becomes a forefront of this issue. Now, obviously not because we have slavery, but because we have two candidates with two drastically different views on the slavery issue. One of my favorite touch points in the entire museum is this one, and you can probably already guess what this is about. It's the House Divided. And so when a person touches this, they hear about the House Divided speech. Then we get into the debates with Stephen Douglas, and we hear the exchange back and forth. We hear Douglas's views, we hear Lincoln's views. And there's some great ambient voices and audience, like rah rah, you go get 'em type of thing in the background. So it really brings you into it. It's a fun area. And then we also hear the New York Times behind us giving their promotion to Illinois as being the forefront of politics in the nation. So I think the visitor comes across with the reality that Lincoln is making himself known, but also how slavery and Illinois are becoming a huge battleground as well.
Well, I'll tell you, it's just very, very interesting. And admission prices?
Admission price, we $5 for adults, $3 for group tours over 20, $3 also for seniors, and also for children from ages 6 to adult. Children under 6 are free, and students with an ID also free.
Well, I'll tell you, it doesn't get any more affordable than that.
Yes.
And it's a great way to spend a day, especially if you have out-of-town guests.
I would agree.
So
yes.
It's wonderful to have this in our backyard.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you.
So what do you say? Go around the corner?
Let's do it.
All right. And expound about what we're looking at.
Right, Roy, as we were just talking about, this is what we would call the President's office today. This is his center. This is my favorite room in the whole museum. What we have here are many touch points. Again, these are all reproduction objects which we encourage people to touch. We hear stories here about the Emancipation Proclamation, what Lincoln went through. We also hear differing views about the Emancipation Proclamation, how it was not so accepted by people. And so really just in this room, it has such a feel and such a power. The light coming through the window, that's not a touch point, but yet Lincoln looked at that window, which looked out to the south side of the lawn and looked out to Virginia so much. So this represents really Lincoln and the war that he had to contend with. We have actually over here, Roy, a Civil War tent. And in the Civil War tent, people can sit down and they can touch the map on the table, they can touch the lamp, and there's actually a video here. And so people can hear about the Civil War. And So in many ways, it's a really nice tie-in. No, there was no tent in his office, but yet Lincoln never escaped the Civil War. So this is an interesting aspect of it. We also hear about Mary, and Mary, of course, was reviled by some, praised by some. And so, touching the fan, we hear about the stories and the different perspectives of Mary Lincoln. And back in the corner, we have coffins, and those coffins represent the death. And many of the people that Lincoln knew, like one of Lincoln's friends, Elmer Ellsworth, who was the first officer to die in the Civil War, was one of Lincoln's friends. He actually lived with Lincoln for a while. And so the Civil War takes on a very personal meaning for Lincoln, and he really takes very much of a personal stake in this when he has people he knows die. And of course, then Willie, in the middle of the Civil War, dies. And over here, these are touch points in which we hear about Lincoln's words. We hear about the first inaugural and the second inaugural, so people can understand the gravity, the meaning, the power of Lincoln's words in the first and second inaugural. So a lot happens here in this particular room.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And where do we go from here, Ron?
Well, now the end is near. Sorry,
Okay.
but the end is near for Lincoln. Yeah, so we're going to go to his final moments.
All right. And, this is my third or fourth time over here, and this is the first time I've noticed this.
Yes. And that's what we want. We want people to come through the museum and, oh, I hadn't noticed that before. I haven't seen it before, and that's good to hear. Without the audio video, this is probably the room that is the most sort of difficult to understand why it's here. It's probably kind of hard to see, especially for those of you watching it. But around here we have pictures of people, and it's very blue. But what this is some of the same people we've been hearing voices from and been introduced to. We know Lincoln's been shot. We know we're going through a life review. So in many ways, Lincoln is sort of nearing the end of his life. And so these people are coming back in his life again. And now we're reminded about what happened and how he got to that point. And so we see here John Wilkes Booth, we see the gun, and we hear audio of Lincoln giving his last address at the White House and how John Wilkes Booth says, this is the last speech he's ever made.
Yeah.
Pretty powerful.
Maybe?
Sure. Roy, this is part 2. If part 1 is the first thing you go through for this theater, the silk screen, which disappears into a video, Lincoln is shot. This is the part 2. What we see here again, people will come in here, silk screen disappears into a video that was filmed, and it's the deathbed scene. So it's pretty much the same thing. Lincoln's on the deathbed. Fritz Klein from Springfield, who is a great Lincoln reenactor, plays Abraham Lincoln, and he did a really great job. So Lincoln's breathing is labored. Mary Lincoln, beside herself, is escorted out. We see the breathing cease. The doctor pronounces him dead, and Stanton says now he belongs to the ages. And the ticking of the clock that you hear the stopwatch stop. The ticking that stops as well. But we know we've reached the end. The door opens behind you, and that's it for the experience.
It's totally awesome, Ron.
Thank you. Yeah.
It couldn't be better. And we really appreciate the opportunity to come back and bring this to everybody who's going to look at it.
Sure.
So,
Would you like me to give you sort of a snapshot of some of the audio video?
if you're offered, I'm taking
All right, let's do it.
All right, thanks.